Right, we will call this meeting back to order. Had a great lunch, mingling with some employees on Employee Appreciation Barbecue Day. So thanks again for all those that made that happen. Where we left off under tab C, Commissioners, was item number 17, which is a zoning and land use stipulation at 19 Kilpecker Lane in Reliance, Wyoming. The request came from Laverne Smith, and I believe we have a representative on his behalf. So at this time, if there's someone here to speak to this stipulation, please address the governing body. Introduce yourself for the record, Mr. Lieber.
Thank you, Councilman, Councilwomen. My name is Jim Lever, and I work for Rocky Mountain Consulting. 7 years ago, just a little history, 7 years ago, Laverne Smith happened to buy this hillside in Reliance, which for all practical purposes, I would quote unquote dedicated as junk land. I couldn't imagine that anybody could do anything with it. So he happened to be very, he had a lot of foresight. He had a lot of personal experience as far as operating machinery. To make a long story short, built himself a nice little shop. He and his family have been in the towing wrecking business for many, many years. He's 75 years old now. The reason I'm here, two reasons, is one is to figure out what to do to get them open again. And then secondly, address maybe some of the definitions, some of the processes, and some of the reasons why he was shut down in the first place. And it was approximately a year ago that he's been shut down and not available. I found out about representing him last night, so I didn't have a chance to make a package for everybody. But I've got some pictures. I've got some information that you may find helpful. But the first thing I'd like to bring up is our definitions, which is when you go into the definitions of businesses, as far as what businesses fall into what categories, and then if you follow the lines across, it'll say, you know, permitted, conditional use, not permitted, or temporary. So for whatever reason, we don't have, there's 23 counties in the state of Wyoming, and there's only one other county that doesn't have a definition for a tow truck service or a wrecker service listed as one of their uses and what type of zoning is required by that particular county. So I know when Laura was here in zoning, they used to trade back and forth some of these definitions between Rock Springs and Green River. I don't know, you know, if the county got involved in any of that or not, but there's a lot of definitions that are missing from the types of businesses and the types of zoning requested. And how Eric in engineering formulated the use of his property was impound, salvage, and storage. So, and John, you can work with me a little bit on this, but the definition of impound is something that is driven off some kind of legal action brought upon either by the sheriff's department, the police department, and that vehicle ends up wherever they approve it to be to end up. It could end up at the county impound lot, could end up at the city impound lot, which is not, if you were to hire L&P Towing and say, we want this vehicle to go here, then he would pick it up and take it there, but it would only be because somebody asked him to. Salvage, the definition of salvage, I have it if somebody wants to hear it, but it's completely different than the definition of storage. Salvage is something like what Pacific Steel does, something like what Steed does out on Kilpecker, which is off of Yellowstone, where they strip down metal parts, strip down cars, they have a car crusher, and then they ship them someplace. So a salvage yard is different than an impound and different than storage. So storage, you know, that the Wyoming, and I've got the rules and regulations from the Wyoming Highway Department as far as what's required. And they changed them a couple years ago. So the wrecker towing company has to, you know, have the right equipment. It's got to be inspected. The drivers can't have any kind of records. It has to be a professional service, and they go on this rotation process with the highway department, the sheriff's department, and the police department. And if you get taken off that rotation service, then you get thrust to the bottom of the pile. And it takes a long time to get back up to the top of the pile again. So Mr. Smith was thrust to the bottom of the pile. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Forgot to turn off my phone. Mr. Smith got thrust to the bottom of the pile. So even if he reopens again, it may take him another year or 2 or 3 to get back up to where the law enforcement start calling him for his services again. And he's got 4 of those huge tractor trailer trucks that can get out on the interstate quickly, haul in tractors, haul in trailers, put the tractors on his lot, put the trailers on his lot until the insurance companies come and settle up. Usually it's anywhere, they're very quick. Usually it's anywhere between 10 and 14 days that it sits on his lot. So according to Mr. Zimmerman, who's not here any longer, he was infraction of being 200 feet too close to the residential area. It's supposed to be 600 feet if you're a salvage, impound, or storage yard. I'm just gonna hand out some pictures if you don't mind me. Pass them down, but you can't even see here's the trailer part. This is the first trailer. And you can't see his building. This is the berm that he put up. And his building's beyond the berm. And there's 3 pictures of
So, Mr. Lever, I'm gonna back up a little bit here because we're aware of the situation. This has been an ongoing matter that dates back to 2017. And our land use staff director has informed us of the ongoing back and forth. We're aware of the violations. We're aware of the notices that were sent out. The process has been explained in regards to the conditional use application. There's certain state statutes. There's our own county regulations that follow certain timelines. All of this has been explained to Mr. Smith. There's still confusion on whether Mr. Smith actually even owns this parcel.
Sure.
But regardless of it, the county has a process to go through. And the last conversation they had was with Mr. Smith was in regards to applying for the conditional use permit. And
Right.
the response was that that was going to take too long because of the different 30-day public hearing notices and back and forth. So I wasn't really sure when the request to get on the agenda, what it was for today, if it was a suggestion, if it was for information, but it feels like, there's an attempt to, I guess, override staff or the Planning and Zoning Commission and come straight before the Board of County Commissioners. And I just think the process is pretty cut and dry. So I'm not sure what the issue is. The fact that the business was shut down, it was shut down because it was in violation and it hasn't been made compliant. So in order to make that compliant, he's got to go through the process.
Sure. And I guess, does he have like an organized file? Who's in charge of, is that engineering, planning and zoning?
Who's in charge of what?
Who's in charge of controlling his conditional use permit?
Well, he would come and obtain that from the land use department,
Right.
which he has done. His wife was actually in yesterday and picked up a permit.
Right.
He's been giving a permit, back when the violation took place.
Which Eric filled out the back of, not to be, because the last thing I want to do is when I came here, but he filled out the impound salvage storage, he checked that box. And I think that's improper for a county employee to fill out what the intent. If that's not the intent, then I think we need to change the definition of that particular piece of property.
I guess, what is it you're looking for this Board of County Commissioners to do? Because from our perspective, we have a department that deals with this.
Sure. But I
The,
also,
the whole entire process has been explained cut and dry for several years. And there's a refusal to go through the process because of the amount of days and time that it takes. And so now there's an attempt to circumvent staff, to circumvent the Planning and Zoning Commission and come right before the Board of County Commissioners. Why?
well, I
Why don't we go through the process?
So I think one of the reasons is I know that next week you're revisiting the definitions of what's included and what type of zoning is on what you publish. And I think that's something that the board, that the county commissioners have to approve.
So you're arguing that it is not an impound salvage and storage yard operation.
Correct.
So what is it?
So it's it's a wrecking towing operation that is.
That's its own classification that this individual just makes up? It doesn't fall under the impound salvage and storage yard?
It would be closer to a trucking company. Everybody else, what I opened this conversation up with is every other county has a definition for either a towing business or a wrecking business. And then if you follow what, it puts the requirement as far as zoning is concerned.
I believe ours is to be pretty clear. It's not like this is the only operation in Sweetwater County that hasn't been through this process or been through the proper zoning regulations. So I'm a little confused. And Eric, if there's anything you would like to add, by all means.
Yeah, how you doing, Eric?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, let's just think a lot of it. As far as I want to address the comment Mr. Lever made as far as yesterday in the application. I was on the phone actually with Mr. Smith and when I was talking to him, I'm like, what category do you want to be under? Impound salvage and storage yard. So I said, I'd just help out, mark the application. I didn't fill out an application. Okay. I want to make that clear. They just need to go through the process. And as far as the definitions go, we are addressing, so just for some clarification purposes, we don't have a definition of trucking. I think that's what Mr. Lever's alluding to. And so one of the things that's on the language amendments next week is a definition of trucking. So when we initially issued the permit back in 17, it was issued under trucking because Mr. Smith had stated that he was going to just do the towing truck. But what happened was he said he would move those vehicles. He would not be bringing those vehicles back to the property. So since we didn't have a definition of trucking, it's a trucking service. We didn't have a definition of towing truck. We fit it under trucking. But then we got complaints that they were storing vehicles of wrecked vehicles, and that's what it was, an impound yard, which met our definition of impound yard. And in the definition of impound yard is towing of vehicles. So it does fit under that definition if you look at it. So we're just looking for compliance. We're just looking for and I guess there's some confusion as to what Mr. Smith wants. And he has to be the one that's applying for it. So I know what it is exactly he is wanting to do. If it's just to have a truck sit there and not bring any vehicles on, I could suppose that would fit under trucking. But the past predicts future. We're concerned about those impound vehicles being brought onto the property. So trucking is a permitted use. It could be and that's what he actually does have a permit for. But if there are any impound vehicles or anything like that brought back on, then it becomes in violation. So I hope that clarifies kind of what's going to be happening in the future as far as definitions. We'll be addressing that next week in our language amendments, which will come to the Board of County Commissioners the following mid-month meeting. But just wanted to make some clarification. Any questions for me, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, so just to be clear, the trucking is the permitted use. But the
Correct.
complaint that was brought to Sweetwater County was that it was a storage and salvage yard,
Exactly. So that was the
not
issue.
in compliance with the
Right.
zoning regulations.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So for that property right now, it is a permit. They have a permit for trucking. So.
Any questions for staff?
Seems pretty cut and dry.
So I guess, getting back to you, Mr. Lever, where's the confusion?
So the confusion is why don't we have a category for towing or wrecker service? What good does it do us to have a ambiguous trucking category without defining it better?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Richards.
I just don't think it's ambiguous. I think it feels to me like Mr. Smith wants to do something that is not allowed under the current regulations. So the argument's being made that the current regulations are ambiguous, so he should be allowed to do it. But we do define the storage of vehicles in our regulation, and it seems to me that's what he wants to do. He wants to be able to tow vehicles back to his lot, not to another lot. But we have several other businesses who do this, who went through the process, who got approved, who have the conditional use permits for storage of vehicles, who were able to navigate our system. And I don't think our system is egregious in any way. It's a very simple system. We have a staff that bends over backwards to help people who are just willing to work with them. But Mr. Smith seems to want to operate a storage yard. And we're saying he wants a definition for trucking and towing, but I think those are in there. They're two separate things. Trucking is trucking, and bringing a wrecked vehicle or other vehicle back to your lot and storing it is covered under our current regulations. We have conditional use permits throughout the county where other businesses are doing this and doing it successfully and regularly, but they were all able to go through the process. Some of them entered into that process because they violated and worked with staff to bring their operations into compliance.
So he's a wrecking business. He's a towing business. So how would you recommend that he fills out the application to be in compliance when you have?
Well, I think it's very Well, I think the definitions are there, and if he wants to operate a storage salvage yard, he has to apply for a conditional use permit to operate a storage salvage yard.
It's not a salvage.
Creating well, it's still a storage, right?
Well,
He
has
wants to
the
store wrecked vehicles.
Wyoming Highway Department.
We're not the Wyoming Highway Department.
I understand.
We're,
All right,
we're,
one at a time here.
we are,
Commissioner Richards.
we
you have
are
the floor.
authorized under Wyoming statute to adopt our own zoning regulations. And we have done that. We have our own definitions of those. Yeah, you can pull up definitions and compare them to state definitions, but we don't always use their definitions. We create our own definitions in our zoning code. And I think the definitions are there to cover what he wants to do. I think the problem is our regulations don't allow what he wants to do in the place that he wants to do it. So he wants to end run a process which is statutory and it's well written out, and it goes through land use department, it goes through planning and zoning commission, and then to us. And then we are obligated by statute to consider the recommendation of planning and zoning. It's not our job just to say,
No, I understand that.
and I think the first step is he needs to actually submit a conditional use permit application. There's nothing even really for us to consider at this point.
But in good faith.
Jim, let him finish.
Sorry,
Well, I think I am.
I thought you were.
There's a process here, and he has done nothing at all to be engaged in the actual process.
So I believe that there isn't a definition in the county types of businesses that represents towing and wrecking and what is required of a towing business or a wrecking business as far as storage is concerned for a period of time. Now, if that's a different issue, then, whether or not somebody, his competition complained to him or whatever, I'm not here to argue that. I'm just here to facilitate whatever he needs to do to get back into business. And if, it's not possible for him to get back into business, then, I guess that's between, the county and Mr. Smith. But, just looking at this from an outsider and looking at the different definitions that every other county has, they have a much more elongated version of types of businesses that each category has. And if you have a different definition of salvage opposed to what the true definition of salvage is, then I think that needs to be, either updated, addressed, because if you're not a salvage yard, then why would you want to agree to be a salvage yard on the conditional use permit? And if you're not a storage yard, but you store things there on a temporary basis because when it's 20 below, he's pulling things off the highway and he's got to have a place to put it. It just makes sense from a practical standpoint that he's got a place to put it, just like all the other operators in town.
Sure. And I think a recommendation and language is what I anticipated when I saw the agenda item coming on, because it seemed a little bit odd to surpass the process. And, if we need to get more defined on some of these different terms, then I'm sure that we're more than open to visit that. But it just feels as though the process is there and it's trying to be circumvented. And
Yeah,
so
and
if Mr.
believe me,
Smith
I'm
would
not-
work with land use and figure out, if it's not going to be a storage and salvage yard, then let's work together and figure it out rather than trying to circumvent the process.
As I told Eric yesterday, I'm not standing up for Mr. Smith's, the way that he has acted in the past or any of those things. I find, whether it's Mr. Smith or someone else, I think that we should expand our definitions of types of businesses So it's clear what it is. So we're not leaving, because it's not a salvage yard and it's not an impound lot. And if you look at the definition of impound, your definition may be different than the legal definition of impound. So anyway, I appreciate your time. I understand where you're going with this, so I appreciate the opportunity to have some clarity on this. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Lever. Appreciate you coming over.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions for Mr. Lever, commissioners?
Well, yes,
Commissioner Tillman?
I just think you need to work with Eric in planning and zoning and probably go to the planning and zoning board. That's where the definitions would change if it changes, it comes to us later.
Sure. But I think it's a bigger problem because it's been going on for several years. It's not something that just started, 5 years ago or 7 years ago or 10 years ago. I think it's been something that I've been following for probably 20 years as far as Sweetwater County is concerned.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Jim. It's going to move us right along to item number 18, commissioners. We've got the memorandum of understanding for the National Old Growth Forest. And I believe this was a request from Commissioner Tillman. Anything you'd like to add to
Yes,
that? Commissioner?
this is one of my frustrating assignments of being on the cooperator calls with the U.S. Forest Service regarding the old growth. And they've already developed their plan and their alternatives, and they've had these bi-weekly meetings to give us updates. Eric has also been participating, but now they want us to have an MOU for why, I don't know. But anyway, if we want to play the game, we want to be involved in the process, we need to sign the MOU is what I would say. So for that reason, unless you have any questions, I would recommend that we sign the MOU for the National Old Growth Forest unless Eric has any other advice and recommendations. We have to designate someone to do it. Eric and I have been attending the meetings on Zoom, part of them anyway. So probably would list our names as the designated contacts. If you're all right with that, I would make that motion.
Any questions on this MOU, commissioners? Sounds like we have a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding between the County of Sweetwater and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Forest Service, Washington office, service-wide, and designate Commissioner Tillman as the principal contact. That motion was made by Commissioner Tillman. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Richards. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion's unanimous. Moving right along into item 19, we've got a resolution supporting the development and implementation of a comprehensive economic development strategy. With us is Economic Development Specialist Kayla McDonald and Land Use Director Eric Bingham. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. We are here today for your support in a resolution partnering with UNA County on a comprehensive economic development strategy. A little backstory, Sweetwater County partnered about 5 years ago with what was the Great Divide Economic Development Coalition, and that was comprised of Carbon County and UNA County elected officials. And they put together the 2020 version. And historically, CEDS are updated every 4 to 5 years. And Commissioner Richards sits on SEDC as a liaison, and he had brought this to Eric and I as an agenda item to discuss with the board. And we have discussed with the advisory board the direction of putting this together. And we felt reaching out to UNA County made more sense for us instead of having a conversation with Carbon County, and putting together a CEDS on a federal level of obtaining a grant through the EDA looks better regionally. So we felt a discussion with UNA County was necessary. We've started meeting with them and having conversations, and they've met with their board, their elected officials, and we are here today to just ask for your support to go forward with an agreement to start the process, and then work with I believe our county grants writer, or however you guys are planning to have us go forward as tasking us to do the work. So we're here today just to ask for support, and it's all broke down in the resolution. If you have any questions.
Thanks, Kayla. Questions or comments on the resolution, commissioners?
I do have a question. Kelly Ingersoll updated us at our federal partners meeting about a statewide one.
Yes. So a little bit from what we're hearing on the statewide one, it is still delayed a little bit. Ours is just going to be focused on our side of the state just because there's so much growth anticipated. And we felt like it made sense for us to dive deeper into our section. Theirs is just overall statewide. So we're not sure we're going to get a full glimpse of what we need out of that. And then this gives us more of leveraging for any future grants or activities that we need for projects to back it up.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Richards?
ASEDS EDA should fund pretty much all of this through a grant, which is why we need a memorandum of understanding with our neighboring county. As long as it's a regional plan, EDA is happy to fund them. The only thing it'll be out of pocket for us is the staff time involved. So this is a win-win for us.
Mr. Chairman, just some clarification. We spoke with EDA, it was last week or a week before. Don't know, they all blend into each other, but the grant that we would be applying for this would be coal-affected community grant. There's another grant that's a 50-50. This would be an 80-20, just for clarification. So I think UNT County sounded like they had some interest, including the city of Evanston, Rock Springs, we haven't reached out to yet, or Green River, but potentially in helping match that grant. The total costs associated with, just to have this in your head, for this, I believe EDA stated about 150,000. Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
So I lied, there is some out of pocket.
And that's, you said 80-20? Additional comments, questions, commissioners?
Yes, do you have the 20 in your budget?
We do have some. Yes.
So maybe it's a stupid question, mine usually are, but what does the strategy look like? What is the goal? I mean, I understand
Mhm.
having a plan in place and having something that you can utilize for future grant writing to
Mhm.
gain funds for whatever that may be, but how are we developing the strategy? Is that SEDC that's coming up with that, or is there, you see what I'm getting at? Is there a
Mhm.
plan that the county says, hey, we want to go after housing, or we want to go after whatever, and that's kind of how this is developed, or what's that process look like?
Yeah, Chairman West, my understanding just from exploring this is it's going to help us guide us down a path. Obviously, we're hearing through Pathways of Prosperity, which is the Wyoming Business Council's initial start to their SEDS, that there are certain things that have kind of popped out in the conversations around the state of housing, your workforce. For us, it's going to give us more of a better overview about what we need to do as a county and our partnering counties on how to address it. And I believe that this information will give us more of a snapshot of how to work towards those initiatives and ways that we can better partner within our interagencies too and our counties, if that makes sense. And maybe Eric can add too.
Yeah. I think just to address your question, I think you're talking about stakeholder involvement with it. And I think through the process, we got to establish what stakeholders are going to be involved with that. I think that, to answer
Yeah.
your question, yeah.
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 Mr. Chairman, you might share the Great Divide study with them because I do have that. It would be similar to that. It will give them an idea of what it would include. The study that was done in 2000.
Yeah, and we can do that. We can share it with them.
Any other additional comments, questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Richards?
I move adoption of resolution 24-08-CC-01.
We have a motion to approve resolution 2408 CC01 by Commissioner Richards. Do we have a second?
I would second that.
Second by Commissioner Toman. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion's unanimous. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And the last item under the action and presentation items before us is item number 20. We've got the Sweetwater Economic Development Coalition SEDC board appointment. I believe we had a vacancy come about, which was a county appointee. And so this time I'd hand it over to our liaison, which is Commissioner Richards.
Mr. Chairman, before we took office, when the SEDC was was created as a county entity. At that time, the county appointed a county commissioner to serve on the SEDC board. And the cities each historically had appointed members of their city council, their mayors to serve on the SEDC board. A couple of years ago, there was a push to remove all the elected officials from the board. And the idea was to bring in more business attuned people. But I feel like what's happened in the interim is we've kind of lost connection between the entities like the Sweetwater County Commission and the SEDC board. And while we have a liaison, I took over as liaison almost a year ago, and I'm there. I feel like I don't have the say that I think the county needs to have on the board. And what I'd like to see us do is roll back to the initial vision of that board. And instead of, for our third appointee going outside the board, I'm going to recommend that we appoint me as that third Sweetwater County board member. Rather than just being a liaison, I'll be a voting member of that board.
Thanks, Commissioner. Any discussion on the recommendation?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Tillman?
I don't have discussion. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I was on that. I was one of the elected officials that was removed, and I didn't really agree with it, but I didn't have much choice. My fear was that, it's an advisory board to the participating governing bodies, but it doesn't seem to have been effective like it was originally intended, I don't believe. And a lot of the times it's difficult for board members to give direction and know how they should be voting or representing, because it's an advisory board and ultimately it's up to the governing bodies to make the final decisions. So I never really agreed with removing the electeds from that. I think it's great to have different perspectives, but we were elected to represent all of those, and so I fully support your recommendation. Any other feedback?
Can't add anything to it. I agree.
Does anyone want to move on?
Mr. Chairman, I would make the motion to appoint Commissioner Richards to the SEDC board as the county's, one of the county's representatives.
We do have a motion to appoint Commissioner Island Richards to the Sweetwater Economic Development Coalition Board to fill the vacancy created by Casey Cuckert by Commissioner Toman. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Jones. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just a question.
Commissioner Slaughter.
The vacancy, I did not see when the vacancy term actually expires. Do we know when that
Mr.
expiration
Chairman,
would be?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we're about 1 year into the current term, so I would be filling
2 years of the term.
unexpired term, so 2 year
Okay.
term.
Just a question with respect to that. And so,
February of 27.
okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Toman.
Well, I just want to thank the other applicants who had put their name in. I think there were some good ones to select from. But I think it is important that we have at least one elected official on that board.
Besides Treasurer Cowan.
We do have a motion, a second on the table. All those in favor of the appointment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion is unanimous. That concludes the regular items before us today, Commissioners. We do have one executive session item for discussion, which is for pre-decisional. I do believe we'll take action upon coming out. With that, I entertain motion to enter into executive session for pre-decisional.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Jones. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Richards. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion's unanimous, and we are now in executive.